So here's an example pulled from actual production level code that I wrote myself that you should consider in your next project. So the big issue here is that you need to pull all of your configuration into an environment file. You need to make sure that everything is set up with sane defaults that turn things off. And you need to make sure that your defaults are non functional for a production environment. That is the safe way because what's going to happen is you're going to be forced to go through every setting and make sure it's accurate for that environment. You are not going to miss things that can create security problems or liabilities later. This is part of engineering that you need to understand. Now, as part of this, I have a .env file, which is right here. If you calculate this, it's the parent of the parent. But that file is where all the secrets are stored per environment. Okay. It's either created from environment variables as part of deployment, or it's actively part of the deployment. And so, one of the things that you need to understand is that you need to abstract your settings from your environment and from the application itself. Settings themselves are a separate domain that you need to consider when you do code. Now, in this case, as you can see, I've set my logging to debug by default right here. And I have other overrides that allow me to handle that down here. But basically, what it comes down to is when I load up this file, I'm also setting my logging information. I'm setting my log levels for the environment. I'm doing all the setup that I would normally have as constants in that file because that allows me to deploy in different ways to different environments, whether it's a test domain, a staging environment. Maybe I've got a demo environment for a sales call. I can do whatever I want because I have this customized there. Now, this also leads to better code quality because I've taken the opportunity to create an abstraction and a separation of concerns between settings and functionality. I can now do dependency injection for the settings that I want via this file, which in turn means that I'm actively going to be in a better situation for quality because now I can inject bad values and test and see what happens and make sure that if I have a bad value, that things break in a way that I expect and that they break in a safe way. Think about that they break in a safe way. And so the core issue here is you need to think about your settings as a separate domain. Have an environment file. Make sure that you make use of it. In this case, maybe you don't need this line. This was me making sure that every time the item starts up during the dev process, I get this so I know that my settings are reloaded. Probably add an extra setting to turn this off later. No big deal. Or I'll just, I think I'll just add a setting, turn it off because then I can just have that be a setting, have a default, be done. But as you can see, the environment will go in, it'll get my secret key, which is used for all the session encryption. I don't have to worry about this. This is secure. Why? Because I can check this in without having to worry about that. And because my git ignore adds an ignore for this in this file, I can check in a base version that doesn't have the keys and fails successfully in a good way. And I don't have to worry about security, which means when somebody scans my code repository for keys because it leaks or whatever, they're not going to find the production keys for my deployment because I never checked them in. I never had any reason to, because let's face it, that's a separate environment. They're not going to be on my local machine anyway. Those keys never have to travel, and that makes it more secure. The end result is that you should also use some sane defaults. In this case, I've got debug false because I don't know. In any environment where I have not gone through the hassle of making sure my end file is actually set up correctly, I don't want to leak any data. I want to enable explicitly debug information. So I'm going to do things like limit it to only localhost access and all the rest. And if a developer has this code base and they need to work on it and see something else, they can look at the settings file, look at this at the very top of it, see what's going on, and then just do their own modifications locally for the env file. Simple. This is also about a development path that's easy to think about and put in your head. This is code that fits in your head, which is the most important thing. And so I'm not going to go through and show you everything because it's all the same pattern. Look at the environment file, read the values, Boolean, string, list, whatever, and make use of them. And if they don't exist, then guess what you get here? That's right, you get none values, which means it's not going to work. And that's great. That's great. That is the best thing ever. Because if it starts up and fails because you haven't configured it correctly, then you've just mitigated a possible security issue because somebody forgot a setting they shouldn't have. That is the critical thing. And so when you consider your architecture, when you consider your system's design, consider settings its own domain. This is something that has never failed me, except when I've forgotten about it and I've done something stupid. And so if you actually consider settings its own domain and you stay true to that, you will have a much easier time. Because typically what happens is if you look at your code and you see that the settings are, built in, hard coded, whatever, you're going to have problems. Don't do that to yourself. Pull them out, do the work to separate the concerns so you can do settings injection like this. Whether it's in Python and Django like this, or in some other system where you're using mocks or dependency injection for a settings object of some kind. Just keep this pattern in mind. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time at some point.